Welcome to There Is a Method to the Madness. My name is Rob Maxwell and I'm an exercise physiologist and personal trainer. I am the owner of Maxwell's Fitness Programs and I've been in business for the past 28 years. I always say 25, and in my book I was actually adding it up because I was trying to make it exact, and it's actually 28 years. That is a long time. Different locations, same person, sort of. Same person with a lot of growth. Before I get rolling, I want to thank our sponsors because we cannot make this podcast for free. It costs money. Jonathan and Lynn Gilden of the Gilden Group at Realty Pros are our sponsors, and I'm very grateful to them. They're obviously real estate agents and they do a fantastic job. They can be reached at thegildengroup.com or 386-451-2412. They're both very fit. They're both very active. That's why we thought of them. We only want the best sponsors. Give them a shout if you have any real estate needs. Today, this was brought up by a client, and I like to get my topics from clients, or sometimes I'll put it out on social media what they want me to talk about. And this was brought up by a couple different people, so it must be needed to be said. I'm going to talk a little bit about the myths of rehab, the value of rehab, and the myths of rehab. Rehabilitation. That's a topic I really like. Basically, it's one of the easiest types of clients to work with, if that makes any sense. In other words, when somebody is rehabbing an injury or prehabbing an injury, meaning that they're trying to prevent things from happening, it's a goal my staff, we always hit. It's simple. I mean, it's simple to me, and it's a very concrete goal of what we have to do, and the majority of the progress is made here, in other words, with me. Where other goals, unfortunately, the homework has to be completed by the individual, and I hate to break it to you, it's kind of like if you have kids, or maybe you yourself don't always do your homework. And with weight loss and some of these other goals, I'm relying on people to do what I tell them to do when they leave here. Oftentimes it does not happen. But in this case, we're talking about rehab, it does, because there's not a whole lot they need to do outside of here except potentially ice, which I'm going to get into, heat, and maybe do some other things. Maybe that's why we see the results. I don't know. I just know that if I had to put a number on the percentage of success that I've had with people with rehab, I honestly would say it's 100%. Everybody that's come in that's had an injury or a chronic injury of some kind has absolutely gotten better and gotten back to doing what they want to do. And I'm talking, there are numerous, I couldn't even begin to list different types of injuries. So anyway, let's get into that. I'm going to talk about some of the myths. The first one is a very simple one, and it is when to ice, when to heat. I call it a myth because people ice and ice and ice too much. They put ice on something every time it hurts. I mean, if that was the case, then honestly, I guess that would be okay, because maybe that's when we're supposed to put it on, is when it hurts acutely. But people put it on all the time. Ice, ice, ice. They might have what they call a knee injury, and in reality is a chronic knee issue. And the reason why it constantly hurts them is because they constantly continue to do what they're not supposed to do, whether it be wear high heels or different types of shoes we'd advise them not to do, go up and down stairs all the time. I mean, those are activities I want everybody to get back to, but the bottom line is sometimes we don't have injuries, we have chronic problems that will go away pretty much by themselves if they'll leave it alone, and they won't leave it alone. But anyway, they'll just throw ice on it thinking, oh, this hurts. That doesn't really hurt anything to do it, but it is pretty much a waste of time. So ice. Only use ice in the first 48 hours of the injury. That's it. Now the injury might get re-injured again, and I use that term loosely. I'm in quotations re-injured, meaning that I worked with a young man today. He's had a ACL and meniscus repair complete, and we're doing rehab now. And I told him, as soon as you get home, or actually it would have been much better to do it here, but he's a 18-year-old kid and doesn't know his lessons, so he didn't have his ice bag with him. But ice right afterwards. Why? Rob, you just said ice after the injury. Well, it is injured, slightly. Every time we strengthen something, we're breaking muscle fibers down a little bit, and that's okay. Don't let that scare you off. That's what we're trying to do. Because guess what happens every time you break something down? It grows back. How do you prune a tree? You have to cut off the dead branches. Why? New branches grow. Muscle fibers are the same way. When muscle fibers get slightly pulled, they're slightly torn, believe it or not. So when you feel DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, which drives me crazy, and I can make a whole podcast on people that come in here and complain about not wanting to get sore. I used to teach sports medicine, and I always told my students when that happens to laugh at them and say, I really wish I could get sore because I've adapted so much I can't get sore anymore. That sounds a little mean, but the reality is it's true, because when you're sore, you're growing. And I often don't get sore, and I kind of like when I get sore because that tells me what I did worked. Doesn't mean you have to be sore all the time. I'm trying to make a point here that every time you work out, you're slightly pulling these little fibers apart, these muscle fibers. So you're also pulling some of the other soft tissues, which are tendons, and then some of the harder tissues, which are ligaments. So ligament isn't necessarily considered a soft tissue. It's more in alignment with bone. But you're still pulling it slightly anytime we're doing range of motion exercises. So it's slightly injured. Nothing bad, just slightly. So we want to put ice on it because the whole idea of ice is to reduce blood flow, reduce inflammation. That's why we ice. If it's not swollen, don't ice. Ellen's sitting in here working on some paperwork. She's gonna be our peanut gallery for a minute. Ready, Ellen?
Yeah.
If it's not swollen, don't
ice.
Right. Don't ice. Don't ice just because something hurts a little bit. If it's swollen, put ice on it. If it's not swollen, don't put ice on it. And I also hate to break this to you. A colleague of mine were discussing this morning how there's this author, and I'm not going to say his name because he's already controversial, but he hates ice, and he doesn't even think ice helps that much for inflammation. I'm not going to go that far. I'm just going to say we rely on ice too much. Ice right after injury. So if you watch basketball games and you see a guy fall down on the court with the twisted knee, one of the first things they do is get him off the court, put him on the bench, evaluate him, put a huge ice bag on his knee. That makes sense. Definitely not going to hurt anything. They're trying to control inflammation as much as possible, mostly so they can get a good study on it, a good MRI, a good x-ray. So that's when we would use it. We would use it directly after a workout. Let's say a runner is coming back from runner's knee, chondromalacia, which is nothing more than inflammation underneath the kneecap. Nothing serious. Let's say they do their very first run and they come back, they notice their knee's a little bit puffy, put ice on it. But then that's it. Don't ice it again later and later. We don't do that. All right? So that's the first myth. Don't use ice as much as you think you're supposed to use it. Use it directly after injury or rehab or coming back to training after a basketball game or run. Put it on 10 minutes, control inflammation. Heat is better for chronic injuries because it's the opposite, draws blood in. We want to increase circulation. This is especially true in soft tissue injuries such as muscles and tendons, mostly muscles. So muscles are the most pliable, tendons are the next pliable, ligaments are the least pliable with bone, but we don't put bone at all in any form of the soft tissues. So the softer the tissue, the more pliable it is, the more heat will help. So if you say have some chronic hamstring strain and it's giving you some fits and you're trying to increase range of motion, guess what? You want to increase the pliability of it, which means you want to increase circulation, which means you want heat. So that could be as simple as using heated car seats, putting heat on it before you work out, not after, before. Get it pliable, get it limbered up, get circulation flowing. So heat for chronic and soft tissue, ice for acute, which means right away, and only to control inflammation. Bing, bang, boom, let's move on from ice. The next thing is physical therapy. We need it. We absolutely need it. But, and for my physical therapy friends out there, and I don't know that I have very many anymore because I think I pissed them off through the years, I don't necessarily mean go to physical therapy. And let me explain that. Physical therapy is, in my opinion, one of the absolute best industries there is. When I was in college, that's exactly what I wanted to do. And then I chose psychology, and then I got into exercise physiology. Why? Why, Rob? Just said you loved it. Because I evaluated the field. First off, I worked as a PT tech for 3 years, and part of it was when I was in graduate school. And I got to learn about the industry. I loved it. Don't get me wrong. I loved my job. I worked at Florida Corf, and it's some of the best years of my life was working as a PT tech with these patients. Unfortunately, it made me change my mind about my career path as far as education went. Because, I hate to break it to you, it's a racket. A flat-out racket. We did the best we could as technicians and physical therapists, and man, I had some great friends that were PTs, and they were not taking advantage of anybody. They were doing the absolute best they could. They loved the patients, and I loved my coworkers. Like, I look back now, and these PTs and PTAs, physical therapist assistants, and then the other PT techs like myself, we were like family, and we absolutely loved our patients. I mean, I had a little wellness group that would come in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and it was like, I don't know, I think it was 8 or 10, maybe somewhere in that ballpark, and they would come in, and Florida Corf, the place I worked for, would let me do this, and it was an hour of exercise for the patients who graduated from physical therapy, and we wanted to keep them exercising. And man, it was fun. We had hydraulic machines. I mean, half of them were in wheelchairs, and it was just great because I was spreading my love of exercise with them, and our absolute belief was exercise is going to make them better. And it does, and it absolutely does. Here's the problem. It's become such an industry that the physical therapists, for the most part, hands are tied as far as what they can do with patients. It's like many other industries that have become part of the, medical establishment. There's only so much you can do. There's what you have to bill for. There's different formulas you have to use and techniques you have to use, and everybody's looking at each other like, this person just needs to get stronger. Oh no, we have to do this, and this first. So I'm like, I don't want to do that. Maybe part of it's the very stringent licensing that they have, and I know that there's pros and cons to licensing, and absolutely I get both sides. I've taught both sides, but I think in the case of physical therapy and probably others, they have handcuffs on the physical therapist to do what they really, really know they need to do. And therefore, most of the patients that I've had here, I'm not going to tell anybody not to go. It's just not what I'm going to do. That would be unethical of me to do that. I don't even really give them my strong opinion on it until they go and have a few sessions and come back and tell me they're wasting their time. I allow them to go, and I don't really say much, and they continue to work out with me. But after a few sessions, they're just having me lay on this table and lift my leg a few times. And I'm like, yeah, unfortunately. Or they're just doing this, or they're just doing that. Ultimately, they're not making people stronger. And to be honest with you, it pisses me off. Because the best way we can keep our bodies strong, and the best way we can come back from injury or prevent injury, is to properly strength train. And the majority of patients that I know, if not every single one of them, that go to a physical therapist, again, I have to state, not their individual's fault, do not get stronger because they're not really challenged to get better. It's just simply become an industry of, here they are, check them in, check off my boxes of eval, check this, check that, do this range of motion thing, send them on their way. There's very little challenging that goes on. There's very little understanding of the patient. There's very little time spent with them. I mean, how can you really figure out how to get this person stronger, more mobile, more pliable, if you're basically, checking on them on a cot and then going and checking on somebody else? And again, it's just a money-driven industry. And, if you're pissed off, send me an email. We can talk about it. But That's absolutely the bottom line. So myth number one is you have to be soft. Myth number two, talked about ice and heat. Myth number two is that you have to kind of be babied in physical therapy. It is absolutely not true. The guy I'm working with now that I referred to earlier, not bringing his ice bag with him, he's 18. His mom's paying me to work with him because she said, I'm absolutely not going to send my kid to physical therapy and waste time. It actually costs more even to go to physical therapy to pay your copay and what they charge than it does to pay me my half-hour rate, which, it's not cheap or expensive. It is what it is, but it actually costs more to go to physical therapy with insurance than to come and work with me for 30 minutes, and he's really getting 30 minutes, and he's really getting stronger. He's already making progress, and both parents of this kid are in the medical industry, one of them being a physician, and absolutely agreed, no, have him go to Rob. Let's not waste our time and our money with physical therapy. Why? Because they, again, don't do what they need to do. We cannot baby an injury. There's a process that we have to follow. If the affected area, in his case his knee, is not being challenged to get stronger, guess what? You've got a weak link. It's not going to get stronger by accident. It's not going to get stronger from putting a bag of ice on it and getting billed 15 minutes of therapy time with this huge bag of ice on your knee, followed by sliding your heel back and forth on a bed 4 times, raising it 3 times, and then getting a little pat on the back. Nice job. That's not how you're going to get stronger. It has to be challenged. The first thing we do anytime we're dealing with therapy is the person gets out of pain, direct pain. In this case, he had surgery. He was in a brace. He's out of pain. Now he's got very limited range of motion and very limited strength. That's what we work on. Guess what comes first? Range of motion. Range of motion gets taken care of first. It can also be done, though, with strength. Because guess what? If you have more strength in a short range of motion, if you're trying to get more range of motion, you're then going to have more range of motion. So the two things really go hand in hand. So we work at both. We have to challenge our muscles and our joints if we want to get better. That's the biggest thing. And the myth is, if I work too hard, I'm going to get hurt. No, that's not why we get hurt. In this case, he got hurt playing basketball. It happens. It's a part of life. Typical injury. He went the cut, his foot stayed down, his knee turned, torn ACL, torn meniscus. It happens. It happens in basketball, it happens in football, and it happens in women's soccer. 50% of all female soccer players that play competitively end up with an ACL tear. It happens. It's part of sport. Thankfully, it can be absolutely addressed. If you know anything about football, you know that the famous running back, I'm assuming, we know it's a stupid assumption. Edgerrin James played for the University of Miami in college, and he played in the NFL. He tore his ACL completely on the same knee 2 different times. 2 times. Complete tears. 2 times. Recovered every time. Not only is he one of the greatest running backs to ever play in college football, he's arguably one of the top 15 running backs to ever play in the NFL after 2 ACL tears. Why? Because he challenged himself. Because he wasn't afraid to get back in the gym and do the work. And that's what you have to do. If he would have babied it, if he would have followed the advice of silly people that say, oh, be careful, he'd have never had that NFL career. That's just one example. I can go on and on and on, and I can go on and on and on with people that I've worked with and I've seen here. We have to challenge it. So we work on range of motion and we work on strength. The gym is where we get stronger. You've heard me in other podcasts rant about people that say things like, oh, I don't want to work out, I'm going to get hurt. No, you're going to get hurt if you don't work out. And I love the clients, and I just had one start back today who I worked with years ago, and she moved away, and life happens. Now she's back. And one of the biggest things is I realize I've got to be in the gym for my strength. I need my strength. I want to continue to play tennis. You know, she gets it. She absolutely gets it. She's not going to get injured in the gym. She could potentially get injured on the tennis court if she doesn't keep herself strong. Thankfully, that hasn't happened. And for the most part, she's always kept herself strong, and that's why she doesn't get hurt. So in the gym is where we get stronger. The myth of I'm going to get hurt in there, doing squats, doing this, doing whatever, is an absolute myth that drives me bananas. People get hurt outside of the gym. If they get hurt in the gym, they did it to themselves working with a non-qualified person, and that non-qualified person might have just been themselves. It might have been, you know, they're scrolling through Instagram and they're watching somebody do a ridiculous exercise and then they go try it and they get hurt. Well, sorry, you know, you shouldn't have listened to yourself. Maybe you should hire a pro to at least get you started and show you what to do. So sometimes, you know, the poor professional is just you yourself not being proactive to actually get the proper training. You can get hurt anywhere. Sure, you can get hurt in a gym. You can get hurt on the sidewalk. You can get hurt anywhere. But if you get hurt in the gym, I hate to break it to you, it's your fault. You either hire somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, and that doesn't happen very often anymore. A lot of trainers now are certified, or you just thought you can do it yourself and you did something wrong. If you do exercises correctly, you aren't going to get hurt, and it's going to be the way to prevent injuries. So real quick on the process, we work on range of motion and muscle imbalances and strength. In other words, whatever the injury is or the injury you're trying to prevent, we do a little analysis of, say somebody is a runner. Okay, so what are the most common injury spots for runners who, and running injuries typically are from overtraining, meaning you run too much. So what are those typical injuries? It could be plantar fasciitis. That means that they have a problem in the bottom of their foot that typically comes from tight calves. Knees, runner's knee, or occasionally meniscus issues with the knees. Again, very preventable, very easily fixed. And occasionally hips. Those are like the three areas of injuries in knees. So we look at that and say those are the three spots we got to look at. So essentially foot, ankle, knee, hip. Then I look at what muscles might be overactive in them. And oftentimes with the runner, they have very overactive quads. Same with cycling. So we don't necessarily pound the quads. We have to strengthen oftentimes the glutes and strengthen the hamstrings to counteract all of the eccentric loading they're doing with running. Oftentimes we have to work the anterior tibialis on the front of the shin, not necessarily the calves. Like if you've seen the calves of some runners, they have phenomenal calves. They definitely have cut up calves, like diamond calves from all the work that they do. They don't necessarily need to do a lot of calf training. So it's the opposite. We work the weak areas and we increase the range of motion in the overactive areas. And really it's that simple. We always start with complete full range of motion for the joint and make sure they have their technique down. Once the technique is down and the most full range of motion they should be going in, then we add load. Oftentimes people do the opposite. They just increase load indiscriminately even though they might have horrible form. We got to get the form down, we got to get full range of motion, and we have to then increase load. For example, with me, I run a lot, I bike a lot, I lift a lot. But in my earliest years, I mostly lifted weights. And I was young, I was not educated yet, I was not certified yet, I wasn't licensed yet at anything. So for the most part, my form sucked. I was strong, I was an egotistical kid in my 20s who would squat a lot of weight. And I would probably cringe if I looked at the videos now how I used to squat. Because of that, I developed mostly a forward posture. And, you know, genetically I had very big quads anyway, so big quads. And so even today, I have to really work on my range of motion with squats. So, you know, 56 years old, training forever, and here I am using a TRX to really force myself to keep my knees behind my toes and at the same time try to break parallel a little bit and keep my spine up. So I'm working range of motion more than anything because I have the strength in the quads. I'm trying to develop more strength in the deep gluteals, which is going to come from a deeper flexion of the hamstrings and hips, And that's only going to happen for me right now if I'm using the TRX to make sure I'm keeping my spine up. So it doesn't matter how old you are or what level of fitness you have. That's where you have to work on. I would be an idiot, which, hey, like everybody, I can be guilty of, and sit there and train really heavy in a shorter range of motion. No doubt about it. I could probably still squat a ton of weight. That's not going to do a lot for me in trying to better my mobility in life, because that's really what we're trying to do. We want to be more mobile, and we want to be more, we want to prevent injuries, and we're going to do that if we strengthen every aspect of the joint. If we only get strong in doing half squats, well, guess what? If we ever get deeper for whatever reason, maybe we fall playing basketball or something, we're going to get injured because that deep spot has never been targeted with full range of motion and load. Okay? So myth number 2 is you have to baby yourself in strength training and go through the rigmarole of physical therapy, where oftentimes people regret ever going. You do have to do physical therapy. You just have to do it right. You have to do it with somebody who isn't being pushed by the insurance company to keep you in a certain realm and a certain treatment plan. You need to do it with somebody who knows what they're doing. And it's not just me. There's plenty of good strength and conditioning specialists out there. There's plenty of good physical therapists out there that are in practice for themselves and take cash only, whatever, payment, private pay only. And I know a couple. And, they'll definitely guide you. It's not like they don't know what they're doing. It's just that their hands are tied. Okay, so that is my rant today. I really believe in rehab and prehab. It's one of the most fun things I work on here. When a client calls me up and says, I need to get my hips right, I need to get my knees right, I need to get my core right, whatever, I get excited because I know we're going to see results. Weight loss is the polar opposite. It's at the opposite end of the scale. A lot of times I won't take people on because I've been doing this, as I said, 28 years, and I just know, for the most part, they're not going to do what I need them to do. They're going to feel like a failure, then I'm going to feel like a failure, because people don't realize, you should, but us trainers care. We really care about what we do. We want people to be successful. And so when a weight loss client fails, we feel like we fail. The reality is we told them what they needed to do. The reality is we know what we're doing. The reality is they didn't have the emotional strength or the fortitude to carry out what they needed to do. They failed, and then we feel like we failed, and it sucks. It's the polar opposite with these rehab situations. I can't stress it enough how much fun it is, how great it is to see people get better, get back to their sport, or never have to leave their sport. And, that's an awesome feeling. So until next time, again, I want to thank our sponsors, Jonathan and Lynn Gilden at Gilden Group at Realty Pros. They're the best. They follow this advice. Please give them a shout at 386-451-2412. And until next time, be max fit and be max well.